first of all, myself, I guess, and then the work of the think tank. So for those who don't know me, my name's Coiffait-Gunn. I work here at Pearson in something called the Pearson Think Tank. I've made this joke before, but I'll say it again for the benefit of those who have not been here before. Despite my ridiculous name, I am actually from Yorkshire, and I was actually born in Beverley Westwood Hospital, within your constituency, Graham.
We shut it recently.
Did you?
And replaced it with a newer, better one.
Right, okay. And again, I'm sure most of you know this, but just for the benefit of those who've pitched up and wondering what on earth is going on, the Pearson Think Tank is an independent think tank focused on education quality and access. There's various information there about our different kind of research and thought leadership papers. A couple of things to highlight. First of all, upcoming piece of work on university admissions, specifically Russell Group admissions at the end of the month, which I'll advise you to look out for. Also the fact that we are starting to work more and more with Sir Michael Barber, who is Pearson's Chief Education Advisor, which is very exciting. This means we're going to be more global, so hopefully we'll have lessons to share from this country, but also lots of information from other countries to bring back. And then the key thing is that we are completely funded by Pearson, so everything we produce is free, which is always nice. I'll talk you through the kind of key findings very quickly from the report, and then we're going to have Graham and Rob to kind of respond from different perspectives. As ever, slides are slightly unpleasant to experience, so I've put the page numbers next to them if you want a slightly better quality version of what's on screen. I guess this slide just represents why we're here and why this report happened. So about a year ago, various things were happening in careers, it's fair to say. I've tried to summarise them there on a timeline. I think the key thing for me, and kind of some of the key concerns that arose out of that, and here's just a few of the concerns that I've come across while speaking to people over the course of this project. So the key thing that happened was that there was a reduction in funding, effectively. It's a little bit hidden because it actually comes out of the main school budget, but as hopefully most of you have realised, schools have got a few other pressures on them at the moment, and not all of them have kept that same level of spending. And the other issue is that the responsibility has gone down to schools. So for me, they're the two main changes and the two main areas of concern. It's about a reduction in funding, and it's about responsibility moving from any kind of central organisation down to individual schools, and then how they're responding to that. And that kind of prompted this piece of work. I won't bore you with the other list, but I think some of them there are probably quite familiar. So, just again a little bit of context. This is the second phase from this project. The first phase was with colleagues from the University of Derby, and that was basically looking at what do we already know about careers, what's the existing knowledge and evidence. And it turns out it's quite patchy, the evidence. We did review a lot of sources over the course of that project, but there isn't anything really conclusive there, and I've got some ideas about that. On the one hand, I just think it's really difficult to get robust data about careers. It has very conflicting and changing priorities for it. Sometimes it's a kind of economic necessity, it's about preventing future spending on benefit claimants. Other times it's a kind of ladder for social justice, and it allows kind of people who don't have the same advantages as others to have a kind of fair start in life. And the priorities for careers services seem to move between the two at different times. And it's always difficult to measure cause and effect in education, especially something as complicated as a kind of career path or life path. So I think that kind of explains why the data is quite patchy and the evidence isn't always that conclusive. We did come up with a few kind of recommendations on the basis of that first report. Firstly, we found evidence that suggests that when career is a school-wide focus for the whole school, that's where the best practice can be found. We also found that where it's embedded across the curriculum rather than a kind of one-off ad hoc activity, that's also where the best kind of outcomes can be found. And also a lot of evidence about the need to support it and monitor it. Not just the outcomes, but also the kind of the inputs, the activity. And when you start to relate the two, the kind of careers-related activity with the actual outputs, that's when you get an idea of what has the most impact. And that's when you can make decisions based on evidence about kind of what works and what works less well. One thing from that first study, which I'll draw your attention to because it is relevant to the phase 2 study, is this beautiful thing. I think Nick counted 44 different types of potential career-related activity on there. So hopefully it's comprehensive. And there's everything in there from employer kind of talks to careers fairs and everything else you might expect. We developed that with the colleagues at Derby to find out what is every possible thing that a school could do that has any relevance to careers at all. And then that becomes relevant in the next phase, which you're holding in your hand. Now, there's actually 4 surveys that made up this one, but we concentrate mainly on a very detailed, quite unpleasant to complete survey, which went into great detail on all 44 activities with a representative sample of those involved in careers in England to find out what are you doing this year in this activity. Are you providing careers fairs? Did you provide careers fairs last year? Did you provide careers fairs the year before? So that will hopefully give a little bit of a picture of what's happened over time, over recent years, to not just careers as a whole, but individual activities. And then we ask them other questions about things like which particular age groups receive careers, what are the partners, what sources of support are schools using. As I said, there's a lot of data in there. There is supporting, we're releasing all of the data that went behind this research, so if anybody does want that, just get in touch with me and we'll send that on. So this is, I guess, in summary, what you've got in your hands, this one chart. It's completely illegible, I'm afraid. It does kind of work on the page, hopefully. I haven't actually had a chance to look. Yes, you can read it, great. So it's on page 25, and what that basically shows is all of those activities, which ones have increased over the 3 time periods and which ones have decreased over the 3 time periods. And if, like me, you're a very kind of visual learner, then you can see there's more red, and the red goes further than the green. So that is overall a slightly negative picture. The kind of overall average of everything is -7%. So of all of the activities that you could possibly do with careers, the overall change is it's gone down by -7%, which isn't revolutionary, I don't think. I think a lot of people expected that to be greater, but there is a little bit of devil in the detail, which I will talk about very quickly. First of all, let's look at the very bottom of that chart, which activities have really dropped off a cliff. And for me, the most worrying one there is work experience. And I think that a lot of anecdotal evidence I've heard from all kinds of people supports that. Schools are just not bothering with work experience for a variety of reasons, and to me that's a major problem. My own work experience was pretty poor. I had 2 weeks photocopying in a lawyer's in Hull, which I don't recommend. I don't know how other people's went. I'd be interested in what happened with both of you. And then the other thing that I think is particularly worrying is the concept of individual careers counselling. I think there's been a growing call over the summer, especially about the importance of one-to-one individual careers counselling from a professional advisor, which again has seen a big drop. So I think it was -14% and -9% for those two respectively. It's not a completely negative story. There has been some increases, and one of them is around that idea of career as a kind of cross-curricular theme rather than a kind of ad hoc individual activity, and you can see that's the one that's increased the most, but even then I think it was only 4%. So it's a mixed picture. It's an overall slightly negative picture. There's some particularly negative findings in there. Another kind of devil in the detail fact is around private schools versus state schools. So we've got data in there about different school types. All I will say is we have very low bases for the private schools. I think it's below 50, so we can't. There's nothing representative there. It's only what you'd call indicative data. But what is striking about that data is the contrast is very stark. If you look at the private schools, their provision has been completely flat over that 3-year period. Whereas if you take that data out of here, you'll see an even steeper drop in the state schools. And for me, that is a potentially worrying area. Again, it's not conclusive, it needs more research, but there's definitely something there that merits further investigation. So I guess the final bit from me is just about so what? So things have got a bit worse, especially in some areas. What do we do about it? We came up with 8 recommendations. I think there's something like 27 what I call statements in there, which are not quite as strong as recommendations, but I do encourage you to read them because again there's a lot of detail in there which I think reveals some of the kind of the nuances within this. We've also tried to front load these with the most simple to understand ones after some good advice from comms colleagues in the room. After spending a year on this project, I've kind of lost all track of what the average person thinks is interesting about careers. So we've tried to front load with the more simple ones here. So there's ideas here about having one member of the SMT who's a named responsible lead for careers. A similar process with governing bodies, having a local employer on every board who's responsible for careers, and I think the CBI have some views on that, which I look forward to hearing. There's also something about what we call a balanced profile of careers. Another one of the findings was that there's a real ramp up of activity going into GCSE, but actually before and after that, there's a real wasteland, and actually it should be quite consistent over the course of school. And again, if you look at the private schools, they get that. They're starting earlier, they're finishing later, right up to A levels. So there's something about producing a more kind of balanced level of support over the course of a learner's life within the school. It has to be in there, something about Ofsted explicitly inspecting careers. Now, I know Michael Wilshaw is going to prioritise it, and that's very welcome, but we've got some kind of wording in there about specifically how you could build that into the management and leadership bit of the Ofsted framework to make it really, really explicit to avoid any doubt. There's a couple of things in there about data, and they're, again, it's quite subtle. So we think that government should publish open data, again, not just on outcomes, but also on activity. I think they're very good at talking at the moment about destination measures, which is the learner outcomes, and I think that's really to be welcomed. I think there's some really bold moves being made there across government, which should definitely be applauded. However, what's missing is that data about what is actually happening in schools before that, because as I said earlier, only when you relate the two can you actually work out which of those 44 activities works for your students. So yeah, I would push for this kind of detailed research about activity to support the data about outcomes and destination measures. We also think that the NCS needs to be there to support all ages with career support across all three channels. Again, there's been some moves around this, and I think that's great, but again, it could go further. We think that learners need access to more than just support from their school. Having something like the NCS, if it's a high quality independent service completely separate from their school, then that gives them at least two sources of support and information. And if they're not getting that from anywhere else, then that difference between the two could be really vital. There's a lot of kind of queries about independence of school-only provision. And then the last one is just about a kind of greater role for the NCS, which I think tallies quite nicely with both the NCC and especially Ofsted reports, in terms of the NCS is very well placed to provide that all-age career service, but also to have a kind of strong local role, because there is a bit of a vacuum there. LEPs are kind of coming and beginning to get into this area, but they're still a way behind. Local authorities have had a lot of their powers reduced. There is still a role, we think, on careers specifically for a strong local kind of brokering service, and we think the NCS, with the right support, is best placed to do that. And I will shut up there. Thank you very much. I think it's over to you, Graham.
Over to me. Sorry. Excellent. Can everybody hear perfectly clearly? I feel more comfortable standing up, so I shall stand up. Does that ruin your camera position entirely? Typical disruptive impact. Anyway, it's a great pleasure to be invited along this morning, not least because it's a pleasure to be with the only Yorkshireman I've ever met called Louis. And he, like me, has suffered a severe skiing accident in the last 2 years, so I feel like true brotherhood is going on here. Now, Louis and the team have produced an excellent report which reflects and reinforces the concerns the Education Select Committee, which I chair, has raised about the careers guidance currently available in our schools and colleges. Young people need good quality careers guidance if they're to make informed choices about the courses they take at school and college and their options when they leave. That might seem obvious to the people in this room. It's clearly not obvious to everybody outside. More complex career options, the rising participation age in education and training, make it more essential than ever that teenagers get the support and advice they need. There's also the difficult economic background to consider. 960,000 young people aged 16 to 24 are unemployed. That's 1 in 5 of the cohort. In this challenging climate, good quality careers guidance can serve as a beacon to help young people identify careers which meet their interests, aptitudes and aspirations. Last year, Alan Milburn identified poor careers advice as one of the practical barriers preventing fair access to the professions. But the impact of inadequate careers guidance affects people from all backgrounds. When considering this issue, it's worth putting on record that the Coalition inherited a poor situation. The old Connections service is little mourned overall, but what has followed is not acceptable either. The transfer of responsibility for careers advice to schools last year was regrettable, as was the way it was done. The report published by Ofsted last week revealed the damaging consequences. Ofsted assessed that 80% of schools are not providing effective careers guidance for all their students in years 9, 10 and 11. Only 1 in 3 of the individual careers interviews Ofsted observed were up to standard, 1 in 3. The links between schools and local employers were described as weak. The promotion of options available at other providers, such as vocational training and apprenticeships, was variable and was particularly weak in many 11 to 18 schools, and perhaps put their interest in bums on seat, if you'll forgive my language, in the sixth form ahead of their duty to their pupils. All in all, Ofsted's report made an irresistible case for change. We might well ask, how did this situation come about? Simply, ministers had other priorities at the time. They were under great budgetary pressure and careers guidance lost out. But as today's report underlines, there's an urgent need for a rethink of government policy in this area. Only 12% of educators polled by the Pearson think tank said they knew a lot about the new duty to deliver independent, impartial careers guidance. That's worth reflecting on a moment, considering it's a statutory duty passed to schools. Only 12% felt they really were up on it. 1 in 3 admitted they'd never heard of it. Now, this is partly a question of resources, and partly because schools are not being told that careers guidance is a priority. England is not alone in experiencing these problems. Evidence from other countries that have transferred responsibility for careers guidance to schools, such as the Netherlands and New Zealand, also fails to support this approach. In those countries, the schools were at least given funding to supply the service when they were given the duty to do so. Nevertheless, my committee was told that even there, the transfer of the duty had resulted in a significant reduction in both the quality and the extent of careers guidance provision provided to young people. Separately, the OECD has highlighted the limitations of a purely school-based model of careers advice. They include lack of impartiality, weak links with the labour market, and inconsistency of provision between schools. Now, that matters because young people need guidance in order to make good decisions. A recent study by the Education and Employers Task Force, and I'm glad to see Nick Chambers with us today, underlined the problem. The task force surveyed 11,000 13 to 16-year-olds, mapping their job ambitions against the employment market over the period to 2020. It showed that teenagers have a weak grasp of the availability of certain jobs. For example, 10 times as many youngsters were aiming for jobs in the culture, media and sports sector, 10 times, as there are jobs likely to be available. By contrast, fewer than 1 in 30 young people were considering jobs in banking and finance, even though 1 in 5 jobs are expected to be in that sector. Now, I acknowledge the pressing need to deliver spending efficiencies where possible, but this is not a spending efficiency. It's the promotion of spending inefficiency, as we waste money by placing students on the wrong courses. When the committee visited Bradford College in October 2012, I met a young man whose experience typifies the waste of time, money and potential to which poor careers guidance, or the complete lack of it, can lead. He was taking a course to join the uniformed services. He'd wasted the previous year on a course to enter the public services, which turned out not to be appropriate for the uniformed services, which he actually wanted to go on. When I met him, he was on the appropriate course to line him up to join the fire services that he hoped to do. It was only during the course that he found out that the fire service was shrinking and there were no jobs likely to be available when he finished his course. 2 years potentially down the drain, simply because he didn't get the advice and guidance that he required. The system let that young man down, and it's doing the country no good at all. Now, that's just one anecdotal example. When the experience is scaled up, huge amounts of money are being wasted. Now, what do we do to fix this? As the report today makes clear, and as my committee argued in January, a key part of the answer lies with the new National Careers Service. Even a fraction of the old Connections budget, which was around 196 million, but invested in the NCS, could extend its remit to support and challenge schools and ensure they provide proper careers guidance for all young people. This is a conclusion endorsed by a huge range of organisations, including Ofsted, the CBI, the National Careers Council, and the Association of School and College Leaders. Since its creation, it's embryonic. I wouldn't want to overstate the position with the NCS, but it's done fantastic work. In the last 12 months, it's delivered 1.1 million face-to-face advice sessions with 650,000 adults and handled 367,000 phone calls and web chats. 76% of its adult customers reported progress in learning or work after 6 months, and 56% said the NCS was instrumental in helping them to achieve this. Now, this work should be extended to direct engagement with schools, because at the moment the potential of the NCS for young people is largely going to waste. Today's report shows only 3% of educators polled by Pearson knew a lot about it, while 49% knew a little. The remaining half of those polled had never heard of the National Careers Service. Likewise, a study published by Barnardo's last month reported that not one young person interviewed for the research had heard of the National Careers Service website. To date, the Department for Education has not been pulling its weight in supporting the NCS, whereas the BIS department contributed over 84 million in 2012-13, the Department for Education provided only 4.7 million. This was 3 times less than was contributed for careers by the Ministry of Justice. The DFE needs to up its game. An extra 50 million in funding set against the 56 billion education budget could make a huge difference, deliver a much more sophisticated and responsive service. But this is only part of the answer. Pearson's report goes on to make several other valuable recommendations. It emphasises, as Louis said, the importance of careers leadership in the senior management team and at governor level. Crucially, it suggests that Ofsted should explicitly inspect the quality of careers provision supplied by schools and colleges. Because like all organisations, schools are driven by the things on which they're evaluated. Currently, they are not rigorously and routinely evaluated on careers advice, so it gets neglected by head teachers. I was pleased to see Ofsted recommended in its report last week that its inspectors should take greater account of careers guidance when conducting future school inspections. On a related note, my committee recommended that schools should be required to publish an annual careers plan, setting out information about the careers guidance provided to pupils and the resources allocated to it. Careers plans could form an important part of the new accountability regime for schools. Being obliged to publish their plans would put them under pressure to deliver in that area and not merely to focus on things like GCSEs, which tend to drive behaviour in secondary schools. Today's report also recommends promoting another form of accountability, and that's destination measures. The Education Committee fully supports this recommendation. In our own report, we urge ministers to pursue the development of more sophisticated education destination measures to make the data analysis more meaningful, as Louis' report goes on to expand on today. In May, I questioned the Secretary of State for Education before the Select Committee. He apologised for failing to include destination measures in the government's accountability consultation for schools and made a commitment to strengthen the accountability proposals in that way. We support Minister's ambition to expand the time frame of the destination measures, try to make them a more reliable data set that can be used to hold schools to account, something which for now we do not do. So today's report offers plenty of valuable suggestions and helpful data which further emphasises the scale of the challenge that we face. The blunt truth is that the careers system in our schools is inadequate, and in too many schools both the quantity and the quality of the guidance on offer is deteriorating. Yet the stakes are high, both for young people and the government itself. The education reforms the government has undertaken are undermined if there is no decent signposting within education and between education and the world of employment. The report produced by Louis and his team should serve as another wake-up call to ministers. The National Careers Service needs proper funding if it's to expand its remit and do a good job for the young as well as the old. If this support was available, it could help young people, such as the young man I met in Bradford, to make the right choices first time. If the system fails these students, a human and economic cost is incurred, both by the young people themselves and by the wider society that risks squandering their talents. Today's report shows how we can avoid paying that price. There may be a cloudy horizon now, but there's no reason why careers advice shouldn't see clear skies and sunny days ahead. And I commend the report and the work of the team. Thank you.